Hello, this is a podcast of one's own, and today I'm here with Victoria and Aurora, and we're going to speak about gender and poverty.
Hello.
Which was both of your session. Mm-hmm. It was a really interesting one. Lots of statistics and a lot to think about, especially when we're talking about gender equality on like a global scale, because I feel like sometimes we're all from different backgrounds in GenSoc, but most of us are from Europe.
Yeah, Western-centric.
Western-centric, exactly. Yeah. So sometimes I feel like it's hard to not lose perspective of what's actually important on a global scale and how women all over the world are affected by gender inequality. It was basically a session about how gender inequality and poverty sort of affect each other, and about like what kind of sustainable development has to be done to fight poverty all over the world, and how like gender equality actually helps fighting poverty.
Yes.
Just to one statistic that you brought in the beginning was actually from Oxfam, which said that 60% of the world's poor or undernourished are women.
Yeah.
So can you explain, can you elaborate a bit on that? Why are women more likely to be poor?
So this is all statistics from Oxfam. So there's a bunch of reasons as to why 60% of people who go hungry are women. Most of them have to do with the roles that women have had to take on due to social expectations and social constructs. So globally, women earn 24% less than men. If I sound a bit blocky, it's because I'm reading statistics. At the moment, it will take about 170 years to close the global earning gap between men and women. There's another problem, which is that women do more unpaid work than men do, just again, socially, traditionally. Which means that if they do engage in work, they engage in part-time work because they have unpaid work they have unpaid work to take care of. It's actually estimated that the value of women's unpaid work globally is each year is $10.8 trillion. That's how much.
Insane.
Yeah, I think we spoke about this last time when we talked about the concept of housewives and stuff like that, and we did mention the idea of what if women were paid for their unpaid care work.
That's what I always say, and what I don't understand about it at all makes me so angry. Why doesn't the government or the state pay women to literally being full time? We had another podcast about stay-at-home moms, so I'm not going to say stay-at-home moms because it's a ridiculous term in my point of view. But why are full-time mothers? That's a full-time job.
Yeah.
They get up in the morning with the kids,
clean,
bring them to school, the whole childcare household. That's not. They don't do it because it's fun all the time.
Yeah. No.
It's like a regular job. It's fun. There are fun parts about it, but most of the times you're just tired and you don't want, you'd rather sleep or have some alone time, but you can't do it. So I'm like, this is completely ridiculous, because at the end of the day, the kids are those are the future generations. This is the future workforce. Yeah. They are keeping the state alive. So why are women not paid?
And then
in some families, obviously it's the dad who stays at home with the kids. So
I think we're going to talk about that later, but also there's another thing, which is a lack of higher education for women too. That's part of the problem of how gender equality feeds into poverty, because and it's for example in developing countries, if you know that a man is gonna earn more by having a higher skilled job, and you only have the money to send off one of your children to school or to good school, you're gonna send off your son because they're the one who's gonna
earn more money,
and the girl is gonna help you out and do unskilled labor jobs,
chores and stuff,
as a matter of fact, 75% of women in developing regions are in informal economy. So, for example, agriculture and things like that, where they're not very protected with employment contracts. They don't have a lot of legal rights or social protection, or at least there's a lack of knowledge around that. So it's hard for women in those type of jobs to even break the poverty cycle and escape from those conditions, because they're not paid high enough to actually be able to get financial independence as well. And so just that is part of like, those are some of like the reasons behind why or the reason that research has tried to give as to why women experience poverty more than men. But there's also, we were talking about this a bit now, just when you were talking about how women are the ones who, not women, but people who stay at home to care of their children, which are traditionally more women, how they are the ones who care for the next generation. And there has been a lot of economic theory being developed around sustainable development, which is very basic economics, but I just don't see how, maybe we should consider women too as part of the labor force.
Yeah.
But if
maybe that would actually benefit the state, and they'd be able to like pay higher taxes, which could then be reinvested in like education and stuff.
Or even by having more disposable income, they would be able to purchase more, consume more, which would
which obviously, as like
for the economy,
the unofficial anti-capitalist society is a bit tricky, but I mean that's how it works. That's
that's
the
basic
system we live in.
But it's also like the basic economic theories of like putting money back into the society so that people earn more, are able, like it's a cycle, isn't it? But simultaneously, while you're doing that, you're also ensuring that those who care for children are happier, have shorter working days, because if you have to do unpaid work and paid work at the same time, your quality of life is gonna be worse. But you're ensuring that your kids have, from both of their parents, have an healthier growing experience, basically. And you also ensure that you set the right example for the future generation, so that even the future generation will be able to achieve more gender equality, and thus be able to make the world more sustainable, not in the sense of ecological sustainability, but social and economic sustainability as well.
That's very interesting information from like, because you study business and economics, so just from that point of view. I also found it really interesting how you were talking about how women have sort of different needs, like in terms of like healthcare, and just different, are like vulnerable in a different way that's not really considered, which obviously also plays into that whole inequality thing. So we were speaking, for example, about period poverty, and how that's only now become like a thing that people are aware of, and that we see that we have to fight it. And I mean, obviously in Scotland there's been like a big movement.
Am I wrong in saying that today they passed a law to make period products completely free
for everyone? Yeah. Because obviously here at university, which is amazing, and it's only there since it's been there for like a couple months.
I don't think it's been that long.
We get the products, like menstrual products and everything, tampons and pads. They're in the toilets now, finally. We don't have to pay anymore, because obviously there's the pink tax as well, which puts the same tax on these products as it does for cosmetics and like makeup and stuff. Like, women had a choice, like we choose to bleed once a month. No, we don't. But yeah.
I think, sorry, just to go, this has nothing to do with poverty, but I was on the luxury tax, because in Italy it's a luxury tax. There was this one person, did you guys show me it? That was like, well, actually, a woman just bleeds 7 days a month. 7 days usually bleed this much milliliters. For this much milliliters, you need like, this many pads. It's only one.
Yeah. And you're just like, oh
no.
my god, you...
No.
and this coming from a guy especially, I'm like, I'm sorry, but
also it's so
no uterus, no
unhygienic to
opinion.
just keep one sanitary product on without washing it or cleaning it or changing it for like
it literally
more than
says
8 hours.
on the
It's
description for
dangerous.
like tampons, you have to change it every couple of hours.
Yeah,
Otherwise
because you're
it's-
going to like shop
yeah.
or yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so other than period poverty, there's also other things like just preventing, providing more medical, more medical care to women for women specific conditions.
Yeah.
So for example, developing countries still have a problem with mortality rates at birth for the mother and
Maternal
from the child.
deaths.
Yeah, maternal deaths. Thank you. I couldn't remember the word maternal death. So there is the question of why shouldn't we provide more for that? That's very gender specific. There's a very gender specific issue.
Yeah.
So that, but also providing better sexual education to women too, as to like preventing them
From
to
even-
contracting diseases, so providing better sexual education, at the same time giving medical care to conditions that may ostracize them from society. So for example, I read about obstetric fistula, which is a medical condition in which a hole develops in the birth canal as a result of childbirth, and it can result in incontinence for women, and in some cultures or some places, when a woman ends up having that condition, she's ostracized by her husband and her society because of the foul smell, air quotes. But that's what I read online and stuff like that. So these are very, gender specific stuff. There needs to be better care. You can't just expect to solve poverty in a harmonized way, in a sense, unified way, because it is true that there are gender specific issues that need to be addressed. And I think there's a gender equality programming, I want to say by the UN, that looks into these sort of issues too.
Yeah, but also another thing why I think especially like the whole fighting period poverty is so important as well. It literally prevents, I mean, obviously we've spoken about how girls don't receive the same education as guys in certain countries, but also if you're on your period and you don't have anything to prevent the blood from like flowing out basically, you're not going to go to school, like you're not going to, and it's the same here, it's the same in like all over the world, also, like it prevents you from receiving like proper education, and you just won't go.
I think it's also very time consuming if you have sanitary products that are not pads or tampons or this and that, but it's like the traditional cloth, which takes time to clean, and especially if you don't have access to how do you call it in English, like a water system in your house, I don't know,
water.
Running, thank you, but you have to, I just didn't remember the word in English, but if you have to like go somewhere to be able to wash it, and it's for 7 days, like that's very time consuming, and that is gonna be your biggest concern, it's
course,
just you
just can't live your life like it's just different for like that that period of time, pun not intended. I just realized that. So Aurora, you were speaking about poverty and gender in the UK, because we've talked a bit about poverty and problems in developing countries and gender issues there. How are things in the UK?
Not good.
Surprise, surprise.
I mean, I started off the session just by defining what like a poverty line is, because often we see like statistics talking about so and so many people are under the poverty line. So generally there is two ways of defining it. There is relative measures and absolute measures. So relative measures just mean how much resources do you have relative to everyone else. I might be really oversimplifying these, probably more complicated than that, but technically how relative to others, how many resources do you have. And absolute is there's a set amount of resources you need to have a decent standard of living. And if you don't have those resources, then you're under the absolute poverty line. So just like it was just, I don't know, just looking up, like I knew it was bad because like I have sociology, so I studied that, so I knew that it wasn't great. But it's still shocking to look up the statistics and see how bad it is. And I also knew the UK is especially bad when you compare to like a lot of European countries.
Like Scandinavia.
I mean, yeah. But also generally, like, it's obviously not the worst place to be in. And I don't want to be like, oh god, the UK is so bad when there's way worse places to be.
But you can still say that it is quite
bad. Compared to a lot of
yeah.
other Western countries, the UK is just not doing well with like the poverty issue. So if you look at how many, about 22% of all of the UK's population are under the poverty line, and that's just
that's out of 66.4 million people.
14.3, about 14.3 million people.
14.3 million people in the UK live in poverty.
And then when you just look at it, it's around 34% of children. Like, poverty is bad anyway, but especially children shouldn't, like, they shouldn't be under the poverty line. They shouldn't go to bed hungry. They should have, like, a decent amount of resources to live, to start off a good life, but that's just not the case.
So who's most affected? Like, who are the demographic groups that are most affected?
So most affected,
more likely to be under the poverty line.
So there's also a thing called like persistent poverty, which just means out of the last 3 years you've been in poverty for a minimum of 2. So the most affected, like the groups that have been in persistent poverty the most are especially single parents with children. But looking at the statistics, that's where the gender issue comes in. Looking at statistics, about I think 90% of single parents are women. So if you look at that and you see a massive gap between how more affected single families with children are, you'll see that there's the whole issue of like gender pay gap. The fact that if you want to take care of the child, you have to have a full-time job, but if you're a single parent, someone needs to look after the child. So you need to afford daycare or some sort of care, especially if you don't have another, like maybe you have your parents as a support system. So I'm not saying everyone doesn't, but a lot of people just won't have that, or their parents will still also work because it's not like
so you're more likely to take a part-time job.
So you're more like take a part-time
so
job.
You already get paid and you
less.
Can't progress in your profession.
You can't progress. So there's just a lot of like, you're just kept in this like cycle that you can't get out of, and then you try to like take care of the child. That also doesn't really work. It's like it's just a whole issue. And then looking at like just the air quote benefit system in the UK, Kaylee also pointed like yesterday out, it's not really a benefit system.
It's not.
The system in the UK is based on sanctions and punishment mainly.
What does that mean?
So it means, I mean, we looked at that in class. For example, there was this case of, I think it was a single mother who called up and she was like, I need this extra pay, like she was like, I need this extra benefit and blah blah blah, and they were like, well, you're clearly able to, I don't quite remember the case, but it was something like, well, you have a job and you're clearly able to call and you still have a house, so you don't need it. So she didn't get the extra money.
Wow.
So I'm like, it's all,
you have your basic needs met, so
I know, and I'm like,
so as long as you have a cell phone, you don't really need food, right?
Yeah, and I'm like, especially like, that's already really bad if it's just one person, but it just doesn't consider the fact that there's another child, or like multiple children often are the case as well. It's just single families doesn't mean it's just one child and one mom. Like it can just be like a mom and then a multiple children. Or obviously I don't want to like exclude the dad, but as we said, 90% of kids is women. So it's just the benefit system is a lot of like you need to prove continuously that you're like not in a like good condition, yet you're lacking the resources. And then often it's like, well, you're able to work or you're already spending this time. It's just not taking a lot of things into account.
And it's basically like speaking like we always do, talking about intersectionality. So yesterday we had a phenomenal session about feminism and disability, where our member Kaylee, she held the session, and so she was also speaking about how disabled people are way more likely to be poor, obviously because it's less likely for them to receive proper education because of social stigmas, and hence to get a job that actually pays your living expenses. And same goes for ethnic and just like other minorities. There are just more hurdles to take, basically, like more barriers for you to receive education, get a job, and everything. So that's obviously the more intersections, as per usual, the more intersections, the more you suffer in society. And that's not because you're not qualified or anything, but because society makes it as hard as possible for you to get the same job that, you know, someone from a wealthier background or a white skin color has.
Yeah.
So the last thing we spoke about in the session was global warming.
Yes.
And we're also having a session coming up. It's probably going to be a collab with the Sustainability Society, hopefully.
Excited for that.
So we're going to talk about how global warming and sustainability are feminist issues because they tend to affect women more. So yeah, how can we push for like an economic growth in a sustainable way? That's the question that we asked. But first, maybe can you explain or elaborate a bit on how climate change is a feminist issue or how it concerns women more?
Yes. So we said before that women in developing countries are the ones who do most of the agricultural labor or land labor. So if climate change was to affect the lands, if you think about floods or rains or those type of issues,
just extreme heat,
or the other the other hand, extreme heat. I don't remember the word in English, but so extreme heat and dry land, basically, they would be the ones who would have to respond most with to those changes. And that is also obviously that means that everybody would be affected by climate change. And there is an issue of would developing countries be more affected by climate change anyways, but there's also the issue of would climate change affect women in poverty the most, because they're already doing those jobs that would have to who rely on natural resources.
So obviously if there's a flood or a hurricane or whatever you say that's obviously caused by the climate crisis, it would affect the world's poor obviously more, because if you lose your home, you don't have any resources, you can't just move into a new place, you'd have no money to rebuild it, you lose your entire foundation and everything. And since most of the world's poor are women, obviously women are disproportionately affected by climate change. So that does make sense. And then I remember we were watching a video where we were talking after a bit about how gender responsible climate actions are, because obviously we have seen a lot of change and people, especially young girls pushing forward, like Greta Thunberg and everyone just sort of speaking up about how climate change, the climate crisis is real, and we have to change the way we live, and action has been taken, but how does it actually take into account the actions that's been taken? How does it take gender issues into account? Because like we said before, women sometimes they have different schedules, different needs, and it's often not considered by those action plans, and also because there are literally no women on the board to speak up about the issues that affect women.
I think one of the things that I found most interesting about the video that we were watching, and that really I never thought about what you were saying about scheduling and stuff like that. There was a bit about yes, we can make bus, or we can affect the bus fares or bus times in order to prevent climate change, or in order to reduce the amount of car usage and stuff like that. But we need to make sure that those times that we apply, those fares that we apply, are actually convenient not only for women but for any other minority. So it's a view on climate change policy that takes into account the fact that policymakers should not be only people who are already in charge. Because people who are already in charge are usually people who are white men. So
again,
it's that whole idea of having to have ways to make sure that women women in developing countries as well, though they are like obviously we're talking about like young girls and Greta and stuff like that, but they are the ones whose voice are being heard together with the ones of maybe engineering expert or whatever expert. Together, the two voices need to be considered together in order to make sure that the policies that come out of it are not just white activism, but they're actually effective for the wider society. I think even based on the session we had yesterday with Kaylee about disability and feminism, and if you think about a lot of the climate change initiatives that are taking place, a lot of them are ableist and very privileged. Buses, you shouldn't take a car, or the bike. I think I read somewhere like bicycles are, everybody can use bicycles. Not everybody can. Like, it's very ableist as well, and the buses as well. Like, yes, the UK, at least Edinburgh, has decent, I would say, bus services for disabled people. But if you think about Italy, or at least Naples, where I'm from, I don't think there's one single bus that is like
really
no accessible.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm from Berlin.
Yeah, so it's a bit different.
So it's a bit different there. But yeah, it's just, it takes longer. Like, you can't just walk down the stairs. You have to wait for the elevator to take you down to the platform. Then you have to get on the subway or onto the bus. Like, it just takes more time. And yeah, so going back to like the whole climate crisis issue, the video we were watching was basically saying how not just like the projects that are funded by the government shouldn't just employ like technical experts, like people who know like how to put it into action, but also social and gender experts, and climate funds need to employ women because obviously they'll know. Yeah,
you need to have the voices of the people who are primarily affected. Yeah. Because otherwise, what's the point? Like, you can have something that is technically impeccable and it's the biggest renewable source of the century and it's amazing, but then you actually try and apply it and it's not doable for anybody who's actually actively involved. I think that's I think that needs to be part of the conversation. And I do think that sometimes activist movements tend to be not communicating with one another.
I also think, and I want to bring this up in our sustainability session, I was talking about in the session how I find it interesting that most climate activists are young girls.
Yeah.
It's like, on the one hand, I'm like, why is it like that? On the other, I'm like, it's, in my opinion, it's like it's socialized as well. Like, women are sort of socialized to be like, to be caring, and it's not you, if you say, oh, I do care about the environment and I want to get involved, I want to help, you're not gonna, like, when you're a woman, you're not gonna get any shit for that. But when you're a man and you're like, oh, I'm a vegan because I care about the environment, you're very likely to be made fun of by your mates or at least by like other people. So I think that explains it a little, but I do think that the climate movement has a problem because it's really, really white. And also that goes into like the whole like portrayal of it in the media. Yeah. Obviously Greta's amazing and like we've seen her a lot and she's doing a lot of good work. But there are also activists from all over the world who've done the same thing. They've gone on like strike and boycotted like certain things and everything, and they're just not really, it's just not really covered in the media. That's just not focused on, and they're literally cutting activists out of photos. And did you see that on Twitter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So that there was obviously huge like backlash on Twitter and everything.
Happened.
Yeah. But yeah, so maybe we can talk about that in the sustainable. I'm saying sustainable session, but in the collab with the Sustainability Society. Because to be honest, I noticed certain things, but I've never really done proper research on it. I've never looked into it, but I would like for us to speak about it.
Yes.
And yeah, it's obviously really important, and we cannot lose the global perspective when we discuss sometimes, is it feminist for a woman to wear makeup or not? I mean, I'm not saying that's not relevant at all. I'm just saying on a global perspective.
There needs to be more
kind of
perspective
irrelevant.
sometimes, on the things we...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are going to end the session on a humble note.
Yes.
Of us to do a bit more research into the topic and, cover more subjects that are sort of relevant on a global scale. So, thanks for listening, everyone. And next week, we're going to talk about either disability and feminism or
war.
Gender and war.
Stay tuned. Surprise. No spoilers.
Bye.
Bye.